Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
Hey gang, welcome to another episode of Weird Web Radio. I'm your host, Lonnie Scott, and it's great to have you all here. On this episode, we're going to be talking again to John Beckett. And if John needs an intro at this point, I'm sorry you've missed out on all his excellent work. This is John's third visit to the show, and I'm honored and very glad that he's back. In fact, we're going to be talking about a very special subject called Tower Time, in which, we're going to cover all the specific challenges facing the world today, specifically for us who are in the pagan and magical world, and the seeming uptick in paranormal activity, weird things, magic, and things that are just really going off the rails, it seems, or popping up in lives you really wouldn't expect it. I hope you all had a good Yule, Christmas, and celebrate a good Happy New Year. If you haven't yet, go to the blog for weirdwebradio.com and check out the Weird Webby awards that I award some of my very favorite things throughout the year. And as always, come join us on Patreon by going to weirdwebradio.com, clicking join the membership, or patreon.com/weirdwebradio. to enjoy the bonus episodes and extra audio with all my guests. I hope you enjoy the show and stay weird out there, my friends. Okay, we're recording. John Beckett, welcome back to the show, my friend. It's great to have you here.
It's good to be back. Always enjoy the chance to talk to you and sit here and ramble on for a little bit.
Yeah, I know. We will be prone to rambling a time or two here, folks. I'm sure that is bound to happen at some point, but you get more for your money that way, right?
You never know where we're going to go.
That's right. So I guess first up, 2020 having been an interesting and challenging year. One thing a lot of people have gotten to do, myself included, is get more reading done. So what have you been reading, John? What have you read in this past calendar year that's kind of made an impact or maybe even stuck with you a little bit?
Haven't done as much reading as I intended to. This has been a challenging year for me, and it's been a challenging year for everybody. It's been challenging for me in specific ways, and I haven't done a lot of reading. I've got Aidan Wachter's new book sitting here on my desk, waiting for me to pick it up, and I really need to do that. Right underneath it, I've got a book called Magic, Power, Language, Symbol: Magician's Exploration of Linguistics. I've always had an interest in language, in particular how language relates to religion, and how the both the capacity to the language as a representation of reality. What we're doing right now is that representation. You asked me what book I'm reading. I picked up the book. I read some markings on the cover of the book. My brain translated those markings into some sounds. Through technology, the sounds go into your computer and out to the people who are listening, and the people who are listening now have an image in their head. That whole communication process that requires language, I find fascinating. And this was not a great book, it was a good book. I've read some more mainstream books on language in the past that I can go dig up if you're interested. But what are words of power? How do magic and language go together? I can't say the book gave me any, told me anything I didn't already know, but it certainly got me thinking in some new directions. And right now, that's very helpful.
Yeah, I like that. Especially how you talk about thinking about language as it relates, to religion and so on. And
I don't know when I decided to think about it this way. It's been some years now. I just know it wasn't something that came to me naturally. It just occurred to me at some point in my practice to better understand the gods that I work with. I suddenly realized that the names that we're calling them they mean something in that language from the culture that gave them that name or was revealed that name. And for instance, if I say Odin or Othin or Woden, what does that mean if I translate it to the English tongue directly in our modern way of speaking? And you get things like ecstasy. Okay, what does that mean spiritually? And how do I connect to a being like that? And then you've got all these other epithets and hetes and things that are connected to the names of deities that are considered part and parcel of their personalities. But I think it's something more than that. It's getting into what you're talking about. It's language reflecting the reality of their religion in a lot of ways.
And it's exactly correct. And also, if you believe, as I do, that the gods are, if not immortal, certainly far older than we are, that means that Odin existed before humans developed the capacity for language. Were people able to experience Odin without language? If they did, how did they relate to him? How did they understand him? How did they conceptualize him without the power of language? What did our not quite yet human ancestors, how did their encounters with gods and spirits go when they couldn't put those experiences into words? And that's one of those things I don't think we can ever have any definitive answer because we're 200,000 years or so beyond that point. But it certainly is interesting to think about.
Yeah, it is. I agree. It's one of my more. It's one of my favorite ways to spend my time thinking. Getting tongue tied trying to say how I enjoy it. Right. There goes that language problem again.
Yes.
Yeah, and I often think of it. I got into a discussion with someone once in the local community, and the conversation basically just came up, as a polytheist on my end, and I think more of a syncretic duotheist thinking on their end. They're saying, there's only one moon, there's only one sun, there's only one earth. Those stars are individual stars and planets and so on. So why are there so many god names attached to each one of these bodies? And it becomes a fun kind of thought exercise, and not one I think we can ever come to a logical conclusion that makes sense.
And that's always the question: is this the same god known by a different name, or is this a similar god who does similar things in a different culture but is therefore a different person? And again, how do we ever know for sure? But when you look at it, sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other.
To sort of, it brings to mind, Cat Heath and Morgan Daimler, that when I hear anyone say the other in reference to anything spirit, like it's always the other. It's just the other.
And it's and I love listening to both of them. Very, very, very experienced, intelligent, and let's just say wise practitioners. When either one of them has something to say, I pay attention.
A wise man. Very wise indeed. I guess reflecting back on 2020 and part of the reason, we hooked up again to get you on the show, is much of your writing over the past year, especially, it's been sprinkled in, or it's been hyper focused on, is a concept of tower time. And for those folks who may not follow your writing as closely or may not know what tower time means, let's break it down from the beginning. What are you getting at when you talk about tower time?
Okay. Let's take this from a couple different places. Let's start with giving credit where credit is due. The name Tower Time was originated by Byron Ballard. Um, she coined that term to describe the situation that we find ourselves living in, and really have been living in for, by my reckoning, about the last 10 years. It's named, obviously, I would think, for the Tower card in the tarot, which is a card of sudden, drastic, and irreversible change. And just speaking for myself and my own experiences here, it started, again, about somewhere around 2010, 2009, 2010, somewhere in that range. And I started hearing followers of the Morrigan say they had heard the message, get ready, a storm is coming. Troublesome times are coming. Get ready. And then we started seeing strangeness arise. More and more encounters with the other folk. You mentioned Morgan Daimler, who is the I think probably the most knowledgeable person on fairies and fairy lore today, and Morgan talks a lot about their encounters with the fairy folk, but other people are talking about that too. There's a book a couple of years ago called The Myth of Disenchantment. And the author, who is an academic and who unfortunately writes like an academic, says that every generation says, well, people used to see fairies, but we don't anymore. And he goes all the way back and pulls a quote from somebody who said, all the land was full of elves, but now no man can see them. And that was Geoffrey Chaucer writing in the 1300s. So it is an ordinary thing for people to say there used to be fairies, there used to be all these encounters with the other crowd, but now we don't have them anymore. Except now we do. And what we're hearing is more and more people talk about their encounters with the fair folk. More and more encounters with ghosts and spirits and angels and demons and all of these otherworldly beings that most times people have just, if they had, where they had them, people have always had them, but when they've had them, they've rationalized them away. But people aren't rationalizing them away so readily, and they seem to be having more and more and more of them. And then you have people who regularly deal with spirits, who deal with the other world, the hedge witches who jump the hedge, the people, people who have a strong psychic abilities, strong psychic sensitivities and such, who again, for the last 8 or 10 years have been reporting that they're getting stuff a lot more frequently than they used to, and a lot more loudly than they used to. Modern paganism has the idea of the veil between the worlds, and we can argue about what that is or if it is, but the idea that there is this world and that there's the other world, the world of the gods and ancestors, and there's something in between that keeps us from readily going back and forth. We can't go over there very easily, and they can't come over here very easily, except the veil is thin at Samhain and again at Beltane, and then we can more easily hear the dead, and otherworldly beings can more easily make it over here. Well, again, over the last few years, the report from people who do these things a lot is the veil is shredded. The veil isn't even there in some points, in some places. And so that closeness that we are used to experiencing at Samhain, we're now experiencing year round. And then we just keep going here. And then there are the changes in the natural world. There is climate change. That's the big one. Even before we started talking about that, there's all the species loss that has come about primarily due to human activity. I'm old enough to remember when scientists were saying we're about to start entering a new ice age, and some of the climate change skeptics have said, "See, they just say whatever they want to. They don't know anything." Well, no, we're supposed to be entering a new ice age sometime. Ice ages don't don't show up on a stopwatch. But there are cycles, and we should be about to start entering it sometime, within sometime between the 1980s and probably the 2080s. We should start seeing a new ice age, and we're not, because, at least in part, because of the carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere, the greenhouse gas effects. But nature has its own cycles, and those seem to be moving quickly. And then we also are seeing the decline of the American empire. We're seeing a rise in nationalism and xenophobia and authoritarianism, and mainly the rich and powerful doing everything they can to remain rich and powerful, no matter what happens. And you got to be careful here that you don't fall off into conspiracy theory land, because you can get yourself screwed up in a hurry that way. But it's not conspiracy theory to say that that people who are rich and powerful want to remain rich and powerful, and they do all kinds of stuff so that they can. So all of these things put together, again, Byron came up with the name Tower Time. Myself and several other people have taken that concept and have added our own take on it, and it's getting stronger. And 2020 and all that 2020 entails is not caused by Tower Time. It's an example of what happens in Tower Time. And so while I don't know of anybody who said, "Oh, we're going to see 2020 is going to have the worst pandemic in over 100 years," the people who pay attention to these things, while we were surprised that with the specifics, we haven't been shocked by the fact that this was a bad year. It's Tower Time. Things are disruptive. Institutions are crumbling. The foundations of our very society are crumbling. And it's not going to go away when Trump leaves office and everybody gets vaccinated. I'm looking forward to those two things, but those are symptoms. That's not the cause of Tower Time. I'm not sure anybody knows what the cause of Tower Time is, but these are symptoms. It's the path we've been headed down for the last 10 years or so, and I don't think anybody alive today is going to see the end of it.
That's a very good summary of the concept, and I think it was really good of you and important to point out that especially things like Trump and the vaccine these are not going to just make everything go away. It's not going to make everything right again, although it'll be good, at least from our perspectives. That's not the solution to the overall problem. As for the increased activity from the other, in 2004, I'm not saying it's my fault. I'm just saying. In 2004, on a former pagan online forum called it was mysticwix.com. Unfortunately, the owners thereof have let it go by the wayside. And it makes me sad because it functioned as an archive of some really great conversation in the way those forums used to be. But in 2004, I launched this idea that I called Operation Bazaar. And I launched it again, called it Operation Bazaar 2.0 on my blog for the show. Anyway, the general idea of it was that you could create a sigil and place it on a penny that would help, because I was also fighting against this concept of de-enchantment everywhere, and it's still pretty pervasive, this idea that we need to re-enchant the world. And I argue that it never stopped being enchanted. You need to learn how to engage with it and see the enchantments and feel the actual enchantment that's there. So my concept was creating sigils for that purpose, to heighten spiritual activity, to turn the volume up on paranormal activity, place it on pennies and leave it in places that tend to be overly mundane and really kind of crushed under the consensus kind of beliefs that we deal with. I saw some fun results come out of my own local area, and I had people reporting back saying they've got some interesting results, but nothing too crazy. I think what I noticed more out of that project in 2004 going forward were the early formations of what has become, the foundational theory of the book that I'm writing, is that not only are these paranormal spots and ghost activities and fairy activity and encountering with the other and so on out there in more numbers than I previously realized. It is massive in the numbers of encounters that are out there. And I don't think, at the heart of it, the sorcerer part of me, I'm always looking for the quintessence of the magic. I just pass the details so much. The details express it to me. So in Tower Time, and with all this extra activity and things going on, I'm again looking for what is the quintessence of it all. What is the nature behind it that's causing it to happen? And now here's that rambling part that we warned everybody. You've been doing a lot of deep thinking about this, and I often give you credit as one of the greatest deep thinkers in modern paganism. Your ability to grasp concepts and break them down in a way for anyone of any path or practice beyond your own, and you don't just focus on your own when you're in your writing, is incredibly useful, I think. So you've spent a lot of time thinking and writing about Tower Time. What are you going to prescribe for this? What are your answers to deal with it and move forward?
Okay, so first of all, I want to go back to something when you just started your segment here about re-enchanting the world, and I'm pretty sure I blogged about that, 2013, 2014, somewhere in there. But I now agree with you. The world has always been enchanted. We just stopped seeing it. That said, the enchantment that is in the world, I believe, is getting stronger, as in the ways that I previously described. You kind of hinted on something there. Did you start all this in 2004? I saw something that was on one of my social media feeds just earlier today, asking, did chaos magicians cause all this crap?
Well, no.
And I agree. So, and I've had people say, well, it's all these people who are casting circles and then not taking them down and leaving gateways to the other world open. No, most your average practitioner has enough trouble casting a circle that actually is between the worlds, much less maintaining it after they've forgotten about it. These things tend to close themselves fairly quickly after you stop using them. There's just not enough. There's not enough people with enough magical oomph to cause this. I am convinced this is mostly a natural phenomenon. Natural in the widest possible sense, not just in the materialistic scientific sense. What we do know, though, is that in times of trouble, more people practice magic. And certainly we are seeing a massive increase in magic and witchcraft and astrology and tarot and all kinds of stuff that fall under the general magical umbrella. And to a certain extent, that creates a feedback loop. It does put more magic out there into the ether. For all that brings, for better or for worse. As for the big thoughts about this, my big thoughts are still highly tentative. But I think we are. First of all, I think there are natural. We know there are natural cycles in nature. We're recording this. We're recording this on Solstice Eve. That's the Earth's trip around annual trip around the sun from winter solstice to winter solstice. That's a natural cycle. The moon goes through its cycles every 29 and a half days. We have the cycles of the seasons and the modern pagan wheel of the year. We have all of these cycles. We also have the larger cycles. And I am not an astrologer, and I am not qualified to discuss astrology and astrological concepts at all. I do know that people who are talk about how we're entering some phases, some cycles we haven't seen in a very long number of years. There is also the concept of astronomical precession. That is an astronomical concept. The Earth, we know the Earth spins on its axis, but the Earth doesn't spin perfectly. It wobbles ever so slightly, and that's why the poles move. The poles move slightly throughout the years. Polaris is our pole star. At one point, Sirius was the pole star, and it will be again. I think it's Sirius. I might be wrong there. There will be. The pole star hasn't always been Polaris, and it won't always be Polaris. It takes about 25,000 years for the Earth to make a complete cycle through all of that precession. And I had a nice conversation with Ivo Dominguez Jr. about this at Mystic South in 2019. And he explained how that is, that's how the Earth moves through each of the 12 houses of the zodiac. Well, if one full revolution through that is 25,000 years, then halfway through it is 12,500 years. Well, what was happening 12,500 years ago? Well, it was the end of the last ice age. It was roughly when people started building Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And if you're not familiar with that, go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia will get you started on it.
Mm-hmm.
It is a fantastic, very much prehistoric construction. Again, it was built and dismantled and rebuilt and dismantled multiple times over several thousand years, the first time being somewhere around that 12,500 years ago. The archaeologist who discovered it, his line was, "The cathedral predates the city." We always had this idea that that people practice these rather informal tribal religions, and then when they got together to they discovered agriculture, invented agriculture, and that caused them to start settling down. And as people settled down, then they started developing formal religions. Göbekli Tepe says that's backwards. People came together to build this before the invention of agriculture, and they started developing agriculture so they could feed the people who were gathering in this place where these massive stone constructions. And the first thing that they were growing, as best we can tell, was grain, not to bake bread, but to brew beer. And I'll just leave that there. Anyway, what this has to do with tower time is that was half a cycle ago. So now we've made a full cycle around. What has bottomed out, and what is starting to build again? And it is my speculation, and at this point I can't state it any more firmly than that. It's a speculation that makes sense to me, and I'm trying to find experience and evidence to either strengthen that speculation or point me towards something else. But my speculation is that was our last magical maximum. You read stories of gods walking bodily on the earth in the past. You see the cave art that's far older than Göbekli Tepe in many cases. We know that magic and the other world and the nearness of the spirits to us was much stronger in past times than it is now. Well, what if we've hit that maximum and now we're headed the other way? And what if it's not a nice gradual decline and incline? What if it's a sharp spike? You hit the bottom and now you do a quick bounce back up. And we're going to start that magic is going to start increasing. The nearness of the other world and this world, those are going to get closer, and it's going to become easier to go back and forth. And all the time that's happening, we have all this world stuff going on. Again, the decline of the American empire, the climate change, the desire of the rich and powerful to remain rich and powerful. And all of these things are coming together, and they're, at the end of the day, what it means is that what I call the peak of Western capitalism is gone, and it ain't coming back. Now, what are things going to look like in the future? What are things going to look like in 2025 and 2030 and 2050? How do we not prepare ourselves for some far off future? How do we deal with this here and now? Not just so we survive this, but so we thrive in it. You know, this it's difficult. It's been difficult to thrive in 2020. And there will be other times in the future where we have more years like 2020, individually or as groups, if not as the whole world, where all you can do is just try to get by and hang on, and better days are coming. But if the nature of the world as we experience it is shifting, if it is becoming more magical, more otherworldly, more strange, more weird, how do we set ourselves up to live good lives, enjoyable lives, satisfying lives, fulfilling lives, in spite of everything that's going on? And that's really the challenge. Not just how do we survive, but how do we thrive?
Agreed. And I think, one of my favorite pet theories, and it's a working theory. I reserve the right to change my mind at any point with better information. I think in part this spike of activity is one, there has been a long-standing belief of this veil between worlds. I don't think it's a thing personally. As an animist at heart, a circle's just as likely to trap the local thing next to you in with you as it is to keep something out. And two, there has been a rapid rise in materialism and this pseudoscience, atheistic kind of worldview growing amongst people, along with all the problems you were talking about, like the complete extinction of species happening at a rapid rate, and climate change and so on. So this vast ecology of different sorts of spirits and persons that we are always surrounded by, perhaps I sometimes think perhaps it's a cornered animal kind of instinct from the other, that they have combined their magics or their responses and natural protections or their own version of ward magic and protection magic has turned the volume way up on those things. And as a result, those of us who have a practice are more sensitive to noticing. Those people who don't have a practice are more likely to encounter ghosts and hauntings, or the Catholics more likely to have the vision of Mary. Those things are, I think, much more bound to happen. I think in a large part that might be part of what's going on.
Very much so. So I've been taking notes while you've been talking. There's three things I want to respond to there. First of all, is the idea of the veil between the worlds, and I get some pushback from some people on that. Morgan Daimler, in particular, doesn't like that. I like to say that the veil is a metaphor. There is this world, there is the other world. There is a boundary between them. Now, is that a veil? Is that mists, as you read in some of the Celtic stories? Is it not a thing, but is it a proximity? And we are we're closer apart, closer together, or farther apart. I don't know. I use the veil as a metaphor because most people understand what I mean when I say it. But certainly, it is a metaphor and not a reality. The reality is this world, the other world. Sometimes it's easier to go back and forth, and sometimes it's not.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the growth in materialism, and that I have to wonder if that's not. And no, I don't wonder. I'm convinced that is the if 12,500 years ago was the last magical maximum, what we're seeing now is the current materialist maximum, where at least in the West, and every time I talk about this stuff, some people tell me, don't talk about this like it's a worldwide phenomena, because Asian cultures have a different way of seeing this, and that has nothing to do with it, and they're not wrong. I can only speak to what I know, and I can't really speak to the Chinese experience and interpretation on this, or the Vietnamese, or any of those things. I can only talk about what I know. But certainly, what we've seen in the past 500 years is what began as the Enlightenment, as a reaction to the excesses of the Christian church, has simply grown through the centuries, and to a large extent, it's been a good thing. I like the fact that that the church can't have people burned at the stake anymore. I like the fact that for the most part, science and the results of science are respected, even though there's a substantial number of people in this country who ignore ignore the results of science when they don't like what it tells them. But materialism pushed things too far. When it went from the church doesn't have a monopoly on the truth to science has the answer to everything. Well, science doesn't have the answer to everything. What science does, it does very well. But there are questions that science is not well equipped to answer. Science and the scientific method are not well equipped to answer. That doesn't make your experiences of otherworldly beings invalid. Your experiences are absolutely valid. And the fact that there's no materialistic explanation for them doesn't mean they didn't happen. It means that the materialistic explanation is inadequate to explain them. And I think, people intuitively understand that. It has to be in some cases beaten out of them, educated out of them, shamed out of them in many cases, and where they get to the point where people are saying if there's not a rational explanation, it can't exist. Well, no, if there's not a rational explanation, it means your rationality isn't big enough. I think we've seen the maximum of materialism, and I think we are gradually headed in the other direction. I think you mentioned animism. I think more and more people are beginning to understand both the wisdom of animism and the ethics of animism. And I think that's a good thing. And that's a long journey ahead of us that we really don't have time to get into today, but I think that's a very good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Third thing I wanted to respond to, you talked about how people interpret their otherworldly experiences by their cultural framework. I might encounter something, and I'm okay. Is this a god I'm talking to? Is this a Is this one of the fair folk? Is this a nature spirit? And the Catholic you mentioned might say, is this a vision of the Virgin Mary? Is this a saint? We all interpret our experiences in the context of our culture. And I think I've probably written on this more than anything else over the last 5 years or so. Certainly, I went heavy into that in both of my books. Trying to step away from this mainstream culture that is nominally Christian and practically atheist, and into a culture and try to building a culture that's based on animism and polytheism and all of those things that our ancestors up until the last 100 to 200 years ago would have assumed is just the way things are. So when I am when I'm teaching a class in something, particularly at a convention, taught an online class last week, last Sunday, and what I said was, you are free to believe what you like. However, I am an animist, a polytheist, a magician, and that forms the context of my interpretations and of my teachings. So when I'm teaching something, I'm teaching from that animist, polytheist, magical viewpoint, not from a materialist and Christian viewpoint. And that different context makes all the difference in the world on what you think is possible, what you will consider might be true, what you will consider can be true. And we could go on all day about the need for context and for building a worldview that reflects the world as you actually experience it, and not the way you've been told that things just have to be.
That's a very excellent point. I mean, I encounter so many people. Aiden and I talked about this last time he was on. Like, there's something about me, in particular, my case in particular. People want to tell me their ghost stories. Complete strangers.
You're safe.
Well, just start telling me. You know, because like you just pointed out, the way they have been taught to interact with the world doesn't compute with the real raw experience of spiritual encounters.
You know, I did a class at several gatherings in 2018 and 2019. It was called The Shredded Veil. And normally in my classes, I work from a very tight script. And I don't like I take questions because I have to take questions, but I'm always nervous giving somebody I don't know an open mic, because they may ramble on for 4 or 5 minutes on some tangent. But in this class, I talked for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then I opened the floor up and I said, I want to hear your otherworldly encounters. I want to hear your ghost stories. I want to hear your encounters with gods and spirits. Tell me about these things. And we always filled up all the time we had, and people were lining up after the class to tell me what they didn't get a chance to tell me in the class. Most people have these stories, and they're afraid to tell them because they're afraid that people are going to think they're weird. Their materialist friends or atheist friends are going to think they're delusional. Their Christian friends are going to think they're listening to the devil. And it's not worth it for them to tell the story and take that risk of being mocked or prayed for or whatever. And so they keep it to themselves, and they rationalize it away and pretend it never happened. But if you give people permission to tell these stories, and if you give them a safe space to tell them in where they're confident they won't be mocked for it, everybody has them.
Mm-hmm.
And as we talked about in the beginning, they're happening more and more frequently now. So not only do people don't just have one, they have two or three or four, and they need a safe space to talk about them.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I absolutely think you're right. I know you've got a class or something. You've talked about teaching classes, of course, and I know you have different things that you do. But you have something planned or coming out soon that involves tower time.
Yes.
Let's get into it. What do you got going on?
Okay, so this will be my 4th online class through my website, undertheancientoaks.com. Registration will open in early January, and the class will start in late January. And the class is called Navigating Tower Time, Magic for an Era of Change. And we're going to spend 6 weeks going over the things that you and I have been talking about for the last 45 minutes or so. We're going to talk about how we really do live in a magical world, and it's not the dead mechanical world that the materialists say it is, and what that means for us and our experiences. We're going to talk about the shifts in the ordinary world, climate change and the political changes, and again, the decline of empire. All empires eventually decline. Some collapse, like Rome. Some, like Britain, just kind of fade away. What's the American empire going to do? Well, we don't know yet. We're in the middle of that movie right now. We're going to talk about shifts in magic and the other world. Again, some of the stuff we've been talking about the last few minutes. The cycles of magic and the cycles of the other world being closer and further away, and what that means for us. So we're going to spend the first 3 weeks trying to build a model of what's going on, because too often what I see is people will get one idea and they'll take off on that idea, and with no idea of how it fits into the whole rest of their world and their worldview. But we want to build a good model of what's going on, with the full understanding that the model is tentative. It is we can't be sure we're right, but it's a place to start, and a place that as we move forward, we can come back and say, yeah, that part, this, and this have happened, and that means that part's almost got to be right. And over here, no, we've seen this other stuff happening over here, and this part of your model, I think that needs to change. And so we'll change the model, and we'll make it better. It's a scientific approach to something that is outside the bounds of ordinary science. So we're going to spend the first half of the class building a model, but once we build the model and we have an idea of what's coming, okay, now how do we respond to it? I've got one module titled "Own Your Witchcraft." Witchcraft is extremely popular these days, but a lot of people who call themselves witches seem to be more interested in aesthetics than in actual spell casting. So I want to encourage people to own their witchcraft and get good at something. Get good at working magic. Get good at dealing with the spirits, if that's what you do, or drawing and firing sigils. And how do we use magic to make our lives better, to help us navigate tower time, with the understanding that the very aspect, the very process of tower time is making that magic stronger and giving us a stronger base from which to work. It's a fascinating time to be doing magic right now.
Absolutely.
we're going to talk about what role the gods and the other spirits are playing in this. We talked earlier. The way I first became aware of this was with some people who follow the Morrigan. Said the Great Queen was telling them, "Get ready, a storm is coming." We know the Morrigan has been very active over the past several years, recruiting people and calling people into her service. And it's not just the Morrigan; it's Odin, it's Hecate, it's Brigid. She's not as loud as some of the others, but she's amassing quite the following. What does that mean that gods are calling people to their service? What does it mean that the fair folk seem to be more active in our world, and what are the opportunities and risks that brings? And then we're going to try to wrap it all up into a final module I'm calling Thriving in Difficult Times. What are the things that we can do spiritually, magically, and mundanely to you're never going to be able to work magic that's going to help you avoid the next 2020. You can't escape it. What you can do is be better prepared to deal with it when it gets here, because we're not likely to see another massive pandemic in the next few years, but we're going to see something, and it may be it may be another disease, it may be it may be actual weather related storms. It may be geopolitical. I don't know what's coming. My gods don't tell me what's coming. They just tell me what to do next. They don't tend to share the big picture with me. Given that this is the environment in which we work, how do we survive, and how do we thrive? How do we live good, deep, fulfilling lives in challenging times? And I don't have all the answers, but I know what I'm doing, and I know what's working for me, and I know what's working for some people who I'm closely associated with, and we're going to talk about those things and see what we can do with it.
Sounds really good. I'd be a real bad host if we didn't talk about this, considering, it is the solstice is upon us, right? What are your plans this year? Like, how are you going to mark the solstice, celebrate Yule, and so on? Is this completely a solitary affair? Are you going online with a group? What do you got going on?
Well, I've been putting together online rituals, beginning with the Stora. And I've committed to continue doing that as long as we aren't able to have in-person rituals. So I put together a winter solstice video ritual. It's on my YouTube page. It went live on Friday, and of course it's still there. So whenever you're listening to it, if you want to go back and celebrate the solstice again, it's there, as are the rituals for the other high days. I have some private work that I'm going to do tonight, and I'm not allowed to talk about that. So, but I will be doing some, what I hope will be some deep work, but we will see. And other than that, probably in the morning, solstice morning, I usually, if I see the, I'm usually at work this time of year. I'm usually at work by the time the sun's up, but I will take a few minutes to step away from the paying work and greet the sun and offer my thanks for the return of the light and my prayers for a better new year.
Well, I know everyone's going to appreciate that. Hopefully it works. And like all things, I know you're a practical man as well. There's magic and there's action to take in the world. So everybody do your best.
Yep.
And please wear your masks, socially distance, be good to each other, and do the best you can to stay safe in these current times. John, I know we've talked a little bit where people can find you. Before we head on over to the Patreon portion of this, let's remind everyone in one big swoop, website, blog, YouTube channel. It's all about you, buddy. Camera's on.
All right. So my personal website is undertheancientoaks.com. That is my teaching site where you will find my my classes and some information about my 2 books, The Path of Paganism and Paganism in Depth. Most people know me through my Patheos blog, which is called Under the Ancient Oaks, but that's not the URL. If you Google John Beckett Patheos, it'll bring it up. I blog 3 times most weeks on paganism, polytheism, magic, politics, whatever I think about. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm mainly on Facebook. If you send me a Facebook friend request, also send me a private message telling me who you are. I get a lot of friend requests from bots and from scammers and spammers. And so if I don't know who you are and you don't tell me who you are, I'm probably not going to accept your request. If you send me a private message and say, "Hey, I heard you on Weird Web Radio," I'll be happy to accept the request. Twitter, about all I do is promote blog posts. Instagram, I do things a little different. I have become somewhat of an amateur photographer, and I share my photography that it sometimes is nature-oriented and sometimes is pagan-oriented and sometimes is just whatever I've shot recently. And I've got the YouTube channel where you'll find my online rituals and some other features that I've done over the years. Yeah, I think that's it.
Sounds good. And I'll make sure that all those links are in the show notes. So, folks, you'll be able to find him, his books, his blog, his YouTube channel, his classes. The roads will be open.
Yep.
All right. We're going to head over to the Patreon portion of the show. If you want to join us, you're going to have to go to weirdwebradio.com, click join the membership, or go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio and come be a part of the awesome crew. Find out just how strange the conversations can get on the other end. And since this is John's second trip into the bonus audio, we're going to have a very unique conversation, unlike any I've had with any prior guest. So I think you guys don't want to miss this one. John, thank you again for being here. It's been really awesome having you.
Thanks for having me. It's always good to talk to you. It's not. This is never an interview. It's always a conversation.
Absolutely, and I appreciate it. All right, folks. Thank you again for tuning in. Come join us on Patreon. Stay weird out there, my friends. And now we get into the bonus portion. John, are you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do the thing. Normally the first question, as you'll recall, maybe, is what famous person's resting place would you most like to visit? I'm just kind of curious. Who would you think of today? It's been a year and some months since I asked you that.
Do you want to hear how they just answered that question? What famous person's resting place would you most like to visit? That and many others, including what they think about the afterlife, what they may or may not do in cemeteries, what are their traditions and magical practices that have to do with the dead, folklore that surrounds their homes, and so much more, available for only $5. $5 a month. Even if I make more than one episode in a month, it's still just $5 a month at patreon.com facebook.com/weirdwebradio or go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. You can find me on Instagram @weirdwebradio. You can find me on Facebook as Weird Web Radio, or come join the new, fun, and exciting Weird Web Radio Facebook group. Thank you again for being here. Stay weird out there, my friends.